sorry, I was supposed to meet a friend of mine there, one of the other agents, and actually fell asleep. I went back to my room, fell asleep, and when I woke up, I said, it's too late. And I go up onto the roof of the hotel, and I can see the My Place bar. And all of a sudden, there's two loud explosions, and the whole front of the building blows out. And I'm like, holy crap. And I went running down to try and find the other agent, and I bumped into him. He had fallen asleep as well. And he never made it to the bar either. But what it was is two guys came by on a motorcycle and threw hand grenades in. And there was several people killed and injured in there.
Man,
So
what are the chances, right?
yeah, I mean, dumb luck, right? I mean, those are somebody smiled on me that day, right? So
Okay, can you introduce yourself for him, please?
my name's Chris McElhinney.
Okay, Chris. Okay, for the audience, before we get going, it's really important, as I've done this channel, talk to everybody in all aspects of law enforcement. And we're going to get into this interview, and you're going to kind of hear about what position Chris did for a long time and why it's very important to law enforcement in general. So that being said, Chris, can you tell me who you worked for?
Worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Did that for 15 years. Worked for Microsoft for 2 years, and have owned my own company now for 22 years.
Okay, and what's the name of your company?
Mick Worldwide.
Okay. I think we're going to start with the DEA stuff, and we're going to get into Mick Worldwide. But give me a little bit of background about yourself, Chris. Tell me about your family, growing up, what kind of kids you were, student, and ultimately, how'd you end up with DEA?
Okay. My life was a bit different from others because I grew up from the time I was 8 years old. I moved to Latin America and grew up in Latin America. Spent 4 years in Argentina, 3.5 years in Venezuela, and actually graduated from high school in Mexico City.
Oh, wow.
So, if you're wondering why I lived in Latin America, my father was the first DEA agent in Latin America in 1970. My father was Frank McElhinney, or is Frank McElhinney, he's still alive, but he was the first DEA agent assigned to South America in 1970. So I followed him there, spent 4 years as a kid in Argentina. From there, there was a threat on his life, so we had to move. We ended up moving to Venezuela, which was the head of the DEA's southern region at that point. And then from there, we moved back to the States for 9 months and then moved to Venezuela. Then moved to Mexico, where I finished high school and graduated from high school. So,
Tell me what was your mom doing while this is going on?
my mom was a nurse, and she was oftentimes a nurse at the U.S. Embassy or had other positions at the U.S. Embassy, like a community liaison officer that helps new people come into the community, stuff like that. So, and she studied her master's degree while overseas, distance learning, and she had not finished her college degree. She had finished a nursing degree, but not her college degree. So she actually finished college and finished her master's degree while overseas in psychology. So,
Where were you born?
I was born in Massachusetts.
Okay, so you were born in Massachusetts, but then your formative years in South America.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I can step back even a little bit further. My father, okay, so he grew up in the Italian section and south side of Boston as a kid. And he grew up, he used to go to Scituate during the summer vacations. And his best friend in Scituate happens to be the nephew of 3 of the biggest mafia bosses in Boston. So fast forward, my dad graduates from college, goes into the Army, joins Border Patrol, decides that's not for him, comes back to Boston as a special agent for the IRS. And his first assignment is to go undercover in the mob. So he did this when I was a baby, and ended up breaking up a huge mafia ring there. He had to testify in 22 different um, uh, trials, and they ended up putting a bunch of people in jail. And he, both in Chicago, New York, and Boston. And as a result, they figured it's best for him to move out of Boston. So he ended up going to Colorado as one of the first agents for, I think it was back then, the BDAC, Bureau of Drugs and Alcohol. I forget what BDAC stands for.
Wow, I've never heard that. I know it was BNDD.
Well, BDAC merged with somebody else to become BNDD.
Okay.
And so my father was there in Colorado doing that. And then how did he end up in Argentina? And so I'm sorry for all the backstory on my father, but
So he goes from, is he still an IRS agent? in
no,
Colorado?
now he's a BDAC agent.
Okay.
He's a
okay.
drug agent.
Okay.
So he's doing that. He gets to be group supervisor in Colorado, and when they went out on a case, had a brand new agent doing an undercover, told the agent, whatever you do, stay put in the location where you're at, because they had the surveillance set up for him. Well, the agent, first thing he does is he meets with the crook, and the crook commits him. He gets in a car and drives off. So my dad is the only one in a car with another new agent. They follow the car where it goes. Car stops. They get out. My dad and the other agent get out, and my dad gets assaulted. He gets jumped by about 40 guys, and they beat the hell out of him. Left him with a broken jaw. One of his testicles was kicked up inside of him again. He has a wire currently in his head there right now. And he was saying that as they're beating on him, he was holding on to his gun for dear life because he knew that if they took it away from him, they're going to shoot him. So, but why am I telling you this? Because he ends up in the hospital, and as he's recovering, the head of BNDD now, because this BNDD comes to see him in the hospital and says, "Hey, I'm transferring you overseas." And he says, "Well, why are you transferring me overseas?" He says, "Because I don't want you here looking for the people that beat you up and to try and get back at them."
Was that true? Do you think your dad would have been looking for him?
I don't know. My dad was pretty much a badass. Yeah, I mean, he is. He's a big guy. He was 6'2". He weighed about 250, and he was solid muscle. And
How old is he now?
he's 87.
Yeah.
He's 87. Yeah. But so they essentially they transferred him to Argentina. So
Wow. So back in those days, it wasn't something like current DEA where you actually apply for those positions.
no, he was the first guy. Matter of fact, he did his first undercover overseas, and the next closest agent to him was 4 countries away.
Wow.
Which is, yeah. So he was sent down there. His first office was a closet. They emptied out a closet in the U.S. Embassy because there's no space. He was initially slated to go to Chile, and like 2 weeks before, the Chile said that they don't have room in the embassy, so they switched him over to Argentina. So we didn't know anything about either, or I was a little kid, but
Wow.
he didn't know anything about Argentina. He had been studying up on Chile. So
Any brothers and sisters?
I do have a sister. I have one sister. Yeah.
Curious, what's she do?
Okay. Well, she's an interesting person because she has a law degree and 2 doctorates in law, or 2 masters in law, and she has a psychology degree and 2 doctorates in psychology. But she's currently doing what she really loves doing, and she's running the Golden Retriever Rescue of Colorado. So that's what she's doing, and she's always surrounded by dogs and loves it.
I'm assuming she had a career with law, right?
Well, yeah, she was actually in charge, or she worked for 10 years for the Nebraska Battered Women and Children's Foundation. Then she taught law for a year and then decided, you know what, this is not for me. This is, what I really want to do is the dog. So.
Wow. Okay. So getting back to you.
Yeah.
Tell me about, like, what kind of kid were you? Were you studious kid? Did you play sports? What was that?
I was a little bit of an overweight kid, but I still played sports, loved soccer, and was okay at soccer. I was not studious person. Was one of these guys that I knew how to study. Okay, so if I had a test, I wouldn't do anything until about an hour before the test, and I'd sit down and I had a way of knowing what the teachers were going to ask, and so I just studied those points, and I always got pretty good grades without really even trying. I was a B student, got a couple of A's speckled in there, not many C's, but just because I could read what the teachers wanted, and that's how I could figure that out. So
How do you end up? Well, let me ask you this: when you're growing up, do you have an idea what you want to do?
no clue. I had no clue whatsoever as a kid. As a matter of fact, I tried out different things. Photography was one of them. I had my own dark room, and I had my own camera, and was out there taking pictures all day and developing them and all. So I did that. Then in high school, I really had no clue. I really had no clue what I wanted to do. And even halfway through college, I didn't. And I got out of college I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but I mean, I actually I worked for Berlitz School of Language for a year and a half. And then I actually, with a friend, put together a language program. We tried to make a go of it, but we had no clues what business, how to run a business, and it failed immediately. But and then I just kind of turned to law enforcement because it was something that I grew up in, and I thought it was an honorable profession, and I liked it. So then I applied for a couple of different positions and ended up with DEA.
Did your dad have any effect on you? Did he push you one way or another?
Yeah, he pushed me away from it. He said, he didn't want me there, not because he didn't think it was a great profession. He loved it. He just didn't want to put me in the line of danger. I mean, I don't think any father wants to put his kid there. If the kid decides to do it, then that's fantastic. But,
So what was his attitude when you applied and got into DEA?
It was, he said, I'm not going to help you. He said, but I won't hinder anything either, which is okay, because I wanted to get in there on my own rights anyway. So
at that point, was he still on the job when you?
Oh yes,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
He was still on the job for probably 8 of the 15 years I was with DEA. He was still on the job.
What did he retire as? Was he a special agent, or did he?
Oh yeah,
SAC, anything like that?
Yeah, he was a 15. He was he was head of he retired as deputy director of EPIC, of Paso Intelligence Center.
Okay.
My father was the longest ranking 15 in DEA history, and he got his 15 fairly quickly, but he was passed over 2 times in a row for promotion due to affirmative action. And
I'm curious, what year, kind of around the era was this?
Okay, so this is probably like the beginning of the 80s.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so he essentially was told that he was number 1 choice on the career board. But that because of affirmative action that came in, that they selected somebody else. And this happened to him twice in a row. And back then, if you got turned down twice in a row by the career board, your career was essentially stagnant. And so he was offered at one point a position to go to headquarters where he might be able to work up to an SES position. He turned it down. He didn't want to be in headquarters.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do you think once you got on, did he ever help you? I mean, I would have thought that he would have had a lot of sway at that point.
He did have sway, but no, he wanted me to kind of earn my own way.
Okay.
And I wanted that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to make a name for myself. He had made a lot of impact on the agency, and I wanted to have a chance to do the same. So.
Okay, so what position do you apply for with DEA?
I came on as a special agent.
Okay.
And I was hired and accepted as a special agent. After first, I applied for a U.S. Secret Service, and I applied for LA County Sheriff's Department. I applied for a bunch of different positions. But I ended up getting selected as a special agent with Drug Enforcement Administration. And about 2 months prior to going to training, I wore glasses at that time. I heard about a new procedure called radiokeratotomy, which was actually the predecessor to the current laser, the LASIK eye surgery. And I thought, well, when I go down to special agents training, the last thing I wanted to have to worry about my glasses and all that stuff. So I flew down to Bogota, Colombia. It had the best surgeon in the world at the time, and the clinic was called Clínica Barraquer in Bogota. Flew down, stayed with one of the agents that my father knew. I went in and had the surgery. It was a really interesting surgery because you're awake and they lay you down and they put lead blankets on you, and then they put some eye drops in your eyes, and you see a guy with a knife slice, and they did 11 slices in each of my eyes. And next day my eyes swelled up like crazy, and but I could see better. And after about a week it was fine, and I get back to DEA, and the day I'm supposed to leave for agents training, I get a call from the administrator, Jack Lawn, at the time, and he calls me and says, "Hey, I'm gonna bounce you from your agents training." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, because that's experimental surgery, and we don't know what's going to happen when blood rushes to your head, and the doctors aren't comfortable about this." I said, "Well, put me through any stress test you want." I said, "I'll do whatever you want at my own risk and sign any type of a waiver." And he said, "No, I can't do that." He said, and he was actually kind of good about it. He said to me, he goes, "Of course, you have every right to sue us if you want and try and get on the job suing us." He says, "But I have to make this decision based on what I'm being told, and that's the decision I'm going to make." So I thought about it, and I said, "Well, do I really want to start a career where I have to sue to get on?" You know, and the answer was no, I didn't want to. So I talked to Jack the next day, and he said to me, "Look, I'll offer you any other position that we have here." He says, "If you want an intelligence analyst position, or if you want a diversion investigator's position," he says, "I'll offer you either one of those." And I truthfully knew nothing about either of the positions. But once I learned about them, I said, "Okay, I'll take the IA position."
So this is, Chris, this is 87-ish?
Yes.
It's really interesting to me that the administrator is calling you personally. I would think that he'd have some attorney that would be reaching out to you.
Well, that's, I think, out of respect for my father, right? I mean, I think that's the way it is, because while my dad didn't actively try to help me, but I think the last name, Jack knew my father real well. So
what did your dad think about this as this was going on?
He had mixed feelings. He told me, he said, "If you want to sue, I'll back you 100%. He said, but he said the IA position is good as well. I think as a father, he's probably thinking, well, the IA at least will keep him out of danger a bit more.
Yeah.
Which wasn't necessarily the truth, but I mean,
Okay, so how old are you at this point?
At that time,
Yeah.
I was 23, 24 years old, something like that.
Okay, so for the audience, tell in broad strokes what IA, it's IA stands for Intelligence Analyst. What do you guys do?
Okay, so basically there's a lot of things that we did. We participated in interviews of people of informants, as well as defendants, to try and identify information and put together intelligence packages that can help move forward an investigation, help protect the agents when they're out on a raid. Essentially, we gathered as much intelligence as we could, and put it together so it's usable for an investigation or for protection of the agents. And a lot of that was also presented in court. And things from link diagrams to diagram how an organization works, to basically one of the things I did while I was in Argentina, I visited every one of the provinces of Argentina and put together a clandestine runway book. And it was essentially 200 pages of where all the clandestine, I mapped out every clandestine runway in Argentina that could possibly be used for drug trafficking. So it's a wide variety of things, and it depends on where you are, what the exact job you did. We put out lots of reports on the cocaine situation in Miami or wherever we were. So it encompasses a lot, but it's more the um, desktop portion of the work as opposed to the street work.
But for the audience, just as from my own standpoint, I cannot imagine doing my job without a good intel analyst. Intel analysts were bread and butter of any investigation that I did, and as long as I had a good IA, it was incredible. Did you ever run into any situations as an IA where an agent kind of talked down to you? Didn't?
Oh yeah, all the time. As a matter of fact, sometimes they would look at it as second-class citizens, but that's okay because I think we had to. Law enforcement is mostly type A personalities, and you have to earn your respect, right? And so, if you didn't know how to deal with that, I mean, you didn't have too much going for you in the agency, really. You had to be able to deal with people that treated you differently, and you had to be able to stand up to them the same one-on-one with them. You couldn't back down, right?
Mhm.
I knew who I was. I mean, I could have been an agent. I did a lot of the stuff that the agents did. On the same token, I know some agents that couldn't have been an analyst because they couldn't have spent the time pouring through all the information that the intelligence that we gathered because they're just too antsy and want to be on the street doing different types of work. So, it was valid. When I was in the Miami Field Division, I had to supervise two agents. I was the head of intelligence for the Miami Field Division at one point and supervised two agents, and in other positions in Bolivia as well, supervised agents. But I had one of the agents one time when I did a review of him. He says, "I don't care what you say, so I'll sign whatever you put. I have I don't care because you're not an agent, so I don't care what your opinion is."
I just
Yeah.
it blows my mind because I think not only is it just a common courtesy thing, but there's people that are on the job, and this just isn't just DEA, but it's just in general, that just think they're smarter than everybody else and aren't willing to reach out and learn and everything else. And boy, like I said, in my book, a good IA was worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. I worked hand in hand with every agent that I work with, and it was a true partnership. And a lot of times they'd be out doing something, call back and say, "Hey, I need this right now," and you get it right now because they depended on it. So, my career as an analyst was a bit different than a lot of people's careers as an analyst. So,
yeah, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But before we do, tell me about what kind of training do you get as an IA? What do you have to learn? How long is it?
Okay, the training was, I believe, it was 4 weeks. It was 3 or 4 weeks, and it was at the DEA Training Academy in Quantico, Virginia.
Okay.
And it was mostly, I mean, we did part of the law. We had to learn about, obviously the laws that were, but then they did things like interview techniques because we were involved in all the interviews, link diagram processing. I started back when obviously we didn't have any computer programs, so everything link diagram was drawing with a little, a ruler or the compass and things like that to make the little circle and what a square meant. But how to gather intelligence, how to process the intelligence, and make sure that everything that we're doing could be presented in court. Intelligence is a broad term, right? So the difference, you have the CIA, which is they work in intelligence, but their intelligence is for intelligence purposes only, right? Well, our intelligence had to be for court actionable items. So there are different types of intelligence. Everything that we did, we had to make sure that it could eventually be presented in court and lead up to the prosecution of somebody. So
Okay. From the academy, how does it work with Intel analysts? Do you get to pick where you want to go, or do they just kind of shoot you to where they feel they want you?
Well, you get a kind of pick, but they ended up sending you wherever they want to, right?
Okay, so the same thing with agents.
Yeah.
You get a wish list, but it's a wish list, and that's not really,
Yeah. In my case, it was kind of an interesting situation because they didn't have a position for. I started in the Denver Field Division.
Okay.
They didn't have an IA position available. They only had two positions there. They both were filled, and no one was going anywhere. So they basically said to me, "You have to move," and that's fine. I was single at the time. I had no problem, and that's when I was sent to the El Paso Intelligence Center.
So you really didn't even spend any time in Denver. You just went.
Yeah, I spent about 4 months in Denver.
Okay.
It was interesting. I mean, because when I came on, as I said, a special agent and a special agent trainee, and I remember we had an agent in the office, and my first day in the office, he basically said to me, "Here's a stack of subpoenas, go out and serve them." And I'm like, "Here's my car keys and go out and do it." And I'm like, I didn't know, I had no idea, right? No. Talked to one of the other guys who's a new guy who came on as well, and he's former Louisiana State Trooper, and he says, "Okay, well, this is what you got to do." He explained it to me, and he asked if he could go with me, and the senior agent said no. So I'm on my own, serving subpoenas. No gun, no badge, no nothing, right?
As an Intel analyst.
No, this is a special agent
This
trainee.
is a special agent, and there you don't have anything at this point.
I wasn't even trained. This was my first day on the job.
Wow.
The first day on the job, I was assigned to a senior special agent. This agent was a piece of work. He really was, because I go out and I serve about 20 subpoenas, and everything goes well, and except for one of them, the big fat guy comes running out and he trips and he wants to hit me, and he trips and he fell and he hurt himself and all. But one of the last place I had to serve on, and I was told to make sure it's the last place to serve, it was a crack house. And here I'm up trying to serve this, right? And obviously they didn't take nobody came to the window. They had bars on the window and this and that. And when I came back, I told the agent, I said, "Look, sorry, I couldn't serve this last place." And he just laughed his ass off. He thought it was the funniest thing. He says, "Yeah, what kind of an idiot tries to serve a crack house?" And I'm like, "Well, you told me to do this, and this is what I'm trying to do because I'm trying to learn the job."
Yeah.
And then, so it was, but so, I mean, I did have some practical experience doing things like that as well prior to going on on the Intel side, which actually then helped me because later on I did a lot of things that a lot of normal Intel analysts didn't do.
You get to El Paso in '88. What are you doing?
Okay, so I was assigned to the Tactical Support Unit, and that unit was the El Paso Intelligence Center it's a multi-agency tactical intelligence center. So what they do is they have agents from and representatives from, I think it was 22 different agencies that are present there. And it's kind of like a melting pot where everybody grabs or shares their intelligence to try and come out with actionable intelligence to either help the agents on a particular case or to protect the agents. I mean, that was the whole issue there. And so I'm assigned to the Tactical Support Unit, and I was given the job as trying to interpret conversations because I spoke Spanish. I grew up in Latin America, I spoke Spanish. Trying to interpret the conversation between drug traffickers that was intercepted off of shortwave radio. Back in those days, there's no such thing as cell phones. And so the drug traffickers in Colombia and in Bolivia and in Peru, they spoke on shortwave radios. And since shortwave radios could not be encrypted, they spoke in code. And so my duty was to try and figure out what they were saying, to try and figure out when a load was going to be shipped or what stage the load was in, or any information that would help the offices in Latin America pinpoint where a particular laboratory or a house is or an individual is or where he was going to be.
How are those communications coming to you? Can you talk, if you can say, how are those communications getting to you? Are they recorded? Are you listening to the radios?
Yes. Well, it's recorded. They were recorded, and we had a radio room where people were recording them, and then there were people transcribing what they heard as well. So I had them both in written and in oral fashion.
But those communications are coming from South America to El Paso?
Yeah, we had radio interception section, like antennas and repeaters in different parts of Colombia and Peru and Bolivia. And so the signal that was intercepted was bounced off of those back to the El Paso Intelligence Center.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And so my job was to try and do that. And so I ended up putting together a dictionary that of terms that were used by the drug traffickers at that time to signify, when it was cocaine paste or cocaine base or HCl, and what they're talking about. Because if not, a lot of times they're talking about, you think they're cattlemen. They're talking about cattle, and does this has this cattle received his vaccination yet? Yes. Okay. So that's the cattle was coca base, right? Has it been vaccinated? Yes. So now it's coca base. Okay, has it received its second vaccination? Yes, now we'll call it coca HCl, right? So cocaine HCl. So I did that for I was assigned there for 2 years, but I ended up in the middle of that, ended up going to Peru twice for Operation Snowcap, and then I ended up going to Panama. That was for a 6-month period. I ended up going to Panama for a 7-month period during the 2 years that I was there.
Okay, so let's talk about Snowcap. So for the audience, you may, for those who've been watching several of the episodes, a couple of the agents have talked about Operation Snowcap. But for the audience that doesn't know what Snowcap is, can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, Snowcap was what they tried to do. They figured, okay, we need to try and stop the cocaine at coming out of the laboratory, so and at the source location, so that it never makes it to the United States. So the idea was to try and identify where there are cocaine laboratories and airfields, and go in and try and seize the cocaine in the laboratories. Had to get rid of the chemicals, somehow get rid of the chemicals, and then the idea was to block the airfield so they're no longer usable. So what we'd end up doing is going in with a team of DEA, team of Peruvian military or Peruvian police, or a combination of both. There's normally a U.S. military advisor on there with us as well. And you go in and once we'd identify where we believe there was a laboratory, we go in a helicopter, set down in a location. You normally had to hike in about an hour and a half hiking to the location. Take down the guys who were manufacturing the cocaine, which is normally peasants, and 4 or 5 people that are there, and sometimes even families that are there. Normally they have maybe one rifle, if anything. You take down that, then you have to figure out what you're going to do with the chemicals, because the chemicals, initially we ended up blowing up the chemicals or lighting them on fire, but the environmental problems that you had from that after a while was an issue. And then right prior to hiking out again, either knock down trees to block off the runway, or more often than not blow up big holes with dynamite in the runway so that they can no longer be used.
You're in the jungle with these guys?
I did both. I was both at Peruvian at the DEA headquarters in Lima, and then I did rotations in the jungle as well.
Oh, what, as an intel analyst, what type of training did they give you? Because I know the agents had some modified ranger school that they went through. So what did they give you?
On the job training. I was essentially, told to stay back, but I didn't.
I'm assuming you're unarmed. Okay, fair enough.
Mostly.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you. I mean, if you're going down there, you're just kind of staying in the back. But what happens if a firefight breaks out? And okay, well,
yeah, no, I mean, officially I was unarmed. But I was able, as I said, I came on as a special agent trainee, and I did things a little bit different than some of the other analysts, because every time the the office went out to the range. I went with them, and I went shooting with them, and I participated in all the physical training. They had the tests, physical fitness tests, the PT tests. I participated in those as well. Just because.
Let me take a step back a little bit, Chris. I want to ask you about Intel analysts in general.
Mhm.
I had an Intel analyst in my last office who did what you did, went out, would go shooting with us, and was just a really good guy. I had an female Intel analyst in Seattle when I started, but she had started as an agent and then transitioned over. As a general rule, can you give me, or is there a type of person that becomes an Intel analyst? Do you see a difference between a type of person that becomes an Intel analyst between a type of person that becomes a special agent?
Yeah, I kind of do. Normally, the Intel analysts are more. Well, actually, you have two different types, right? Because you have. I've had a work with analysts that are former New York City police officers who, when they retired, they become an analyst, right? So,
Mhm.
so you have all sorts, but in general terms, the people that come on as an Intel analyst normally aren't the type A personality that the agents are. They're maybe a little bit more introverted. And some of the better Intel analysts, and that I've met, excel at things like research, and they have more of an analytical mindset than actually physical. So. But you kind of had all types there. You really did, on the Intel side.
Over the course of your career, did you see a specific attribute that made a good Intel analyst?
Well, I think the same attribute to the agents. It's curiosity to get to the bottom of something, right? I mean, if you really want to get to the bottom of something, you're tenacious in getting there, and I think that's what makes a good agent. I think that's what makes a good analyst as well.
Okay. You were talking about, getting back to Snowcap, you were talking about how, as a general rule, you were basically coming across these peasants and, one rifle. For you in particular, were there any close calls where there was some dangerous stuff going on?
Oh, there were shootouts. There were definitely shootouts, but I wasn't involved in the shootouts. Yeah, I actually lucked out in the ones. I say I lucked out, but I mean, when I did go on the operations, we never had a shootout in those. So yeah, I wasn't involved in any of that.
From an Intel analyst standpoint, tell me how Snowcap maybe helped you later on in your career. I mean, I got to imagine you're actually seeing the cocaine being.
Oh yeah, it helped me out tremendously, because it's one thing to see, a kilo of cocaine sitting on a desk, and it's another thing to figure out exactly how it's made, right? And to see what goes in, what's all involved. And also, there's a human side of it too. I mean, you have the coca stompers and the guys out there are stomping on the coca leaves, and the ones, and these are really poor people. I mean, when you start the job, or when I started the job, I tended to believe all drug traffickers are bad people. They're bad people. They got to be in jail. When you're out seeing the people actually making the cocaine, it kind of humanizes it, right? Mm-hmm. So some of the people are really bad people and should be in jail, and some of the other people there had no options, right, with their life. I mean, they grew up poor and they saw it a way out, and was the way out. And then there are some people that were actually, you look at them, you go, in any other situation, this would be an honorable person, right? I mean, they're not out there to hurt anybody. Well, I mean, they are. I mean, they're selling the cocaine, but I mean, they don't want to kill anybody. They don't want to, torture anyone like some of the big drug traffickers are. Could be my friend's dad, right? One of those type of things. So it does humanize it a bit more when you actually see it like that. But it's funny, because one of the other things, on top of I spent so much time in Latin America that I was very comfortable in Latin America. And so there are situations when that came into play that helped out more than any kind of training that I might have had. For example, went out drinking one night, right? A group of agents after a big after coming back from one of the tours in Snowcap. We're in Peru, we're out drinking, and we start walking back. Some of the guys get up ahead, and I'm walking with one of the guys who's a little bit slower because he had a little bit more to drink. And all of a sudden, I see the guys up front get stopped by the police. And next thing you know, I see they're taking their guns out and they're starting to hand the guns over to the police. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I run up and I say, what's going on? Oh, no, they said that we can't carry the guns. And so we're giving them the guns and they'll say we can come pick them up tomorrow. I'm like, whoa, stop. And I told the guys, turn around, I said, just walk back to your hotel. Do not stop. There was two cops there. And I said, no, but I said, just walk. And I stopped and I spoke with the cops and I said, look, here's the situation. We're diplomats, federal agents. We're authorized by your government to carry weapons in this country. And, we're going to carry the guns. And we're going to go home. He said, well, you can't do that. I said, call your boss. Talk to whoever you want to talk to. But we're going home. And, I sent the guys on. And then I followed them back to the hotel. And the police were yelling and screaming at me. And I'm like, I don't care. But those type of things, they might not teach you in training, in agents training or even analyst training, any training, right? But there's situations that, having lived in Latin America and not understanding the police and how they operate and how, embassies operate and things that happen there, there's situations that someone might not encounter in the United States. I can see it, and they might get into a pissing match with a local police officer in the United States, but if the police ultimately tells an agent to turn over his weapon and he's drunk and he may, or had a few drinks, he may decide to do it, he may not, I don't know. It all depends. But this was one of those situations where they would have never seen those guns again. I mean, if they had turned them over to the police, those things would have been gone. So.
Wow. How many tours do you do in Snowcap?
2. I did 2 3-month tours.
Peru?
Yeah, both
Okay.
times.
Tell me about transitioning from Snowcap. How do you get tasked to go to Panama?
Okay, so after Snowcap, I'm back in El Paso Intelligence Center, and I'm there for about 4 or 5 months, and then all of a sudden, we hear about the invasion of Panama, and it just information around Epic, and we're all watching television, and all of a sudden the phone on my desk rings and it says, "Chris, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm watching the invasion of Panama." They said, "Well, stop watching it, go home and pack." So what for? They said, "Well, you're going to Panama for a week." I said, "Okay." So I dropped my stuff, raced home, grabbed my packed for a week, hopped on a plane, and next thing you know, landed at Albrook Air Force Base in Panama, dumped my stuff on the tarmac, hopped on a helicopter. So I was met there by some agents, hopped on a helicopter, and next thing you know, within 20 minutes, maybe a half hour of landing in Peru, in Panama, we're conducting a search warrant on one of Noriega's palaces in Panama.
And why are they sending you down there?
Mostly language ability and the fact that I can get along in Latin America and speak with
No,
people.
but in particular DEA. Why is DEA down
Oh,
there
okay.
in the invasion of Panama?
Okay, because there's a search warrant, arrest warrant for Noriega.
Mhm.
And we were there to try and find Noriega and serve the arrest warrant and get him back into the United States, extradite him back to the U.S.
For drug trafficking.
For drug trafficking, yeah, absolutely.
So you did some searches down there. What were you looking for?
We were looking for any type of information that would show that Noriega was a drug trafficker, was involved with drug trafficking, had connections with drug traffickers, and any type of documentation along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the discovery rules in the United States, we also had to look for anything that would be exculpatory to show that he wasn't involved. So we played the dual role there.
Oh, that's interesting. So even though you were in a different country, you had to, yeah.
Yeah, it was all, we had there was a U.S. attorney that came down with us to make sure that everything was done kosher so that it would be valid in U.S. court system.
Did you find anything?
Found an interesting thing in the first location we went when we did a raid on one of Noriega's houses. I'm looking through some photo albums, and in the photo albums, I find a photograph of a DEA handing an award to Noriega for helping stop something in drug trafficking. And when I look real closely, the person handing the award to Noriega is my father. So
Did you ever ask your dad about it?
yeah, matter of fact, I still have that photo. I mean, I actually took the photo, and probably shouldn't say that right now. But I mean, I put the photo in my pocket because I said, I mean, there were copies of the photo that were sent and put in the case files and everything, but the original is in my possession. So
What'd your dad say?
he laughed. He said that was Noriega. At one point, they allowed him to use a ranch, one of his ranches, to stage off of when they were doing an interdiction effort where they seized, I don't know how many kilos of cocaine coming through. So that was, they gave him a certificate thanking him for that. So
In Panama, I'm assuming at that point, military's gone in, secured everything. Not super dangerous for you, or was it?
no. I mean, when we took off in the helicopter, they were shooting at us. The bullets pinging off the side of the helicopter, and there was a military gunner hanging out the window shooting back at them. I mean, it was full on war. I mean, the war lasted a day or two, maybe, but there are little pockets of insurgents that would shoot at U.S. forces, and so, and then we had other situations. For example, there's a bar that we used to go to called the My Place Bar, and everybody used to go there, and it was a couple blocks from the hotel, and even it was a known servicemen's bar, right? You know, for the U.S. service people to go there, the military. They were on quarantine, so they couldn't go there, but we ended up going there. I mean, we had no quarantine, and sorry, I was supposed to meet a friend of mine there, one of the other agents, and actually fell asleep. I went back to my room, fell asleep, and when I woke up, I said, it's too late. And I go up onto the roof of the hotel, and I can see the My Place Bar. And all of a sudden, there's two loud explosions, and the whole front of the building blows out. And I'm like, holy crap. And I went running down to try and find the other agent, and I bumped into him. He had fallen asleep as well. And he never made it to the bar either. But what it was is two guys came by on a motorcycle and threw hand grenades in. And there was several people killed and injured in there.
Man,
so
what are the chances, right?
Yeah, I mean, dumb luck, right? I mean, somebody smiled on me that day, right? So, but
91, you get to Buenos Aires.
yeah.
Do you apply for that position, or are they saying, hey, Chris, you're going?
No, I applied for that one.
Okay.
That one I applied.
Why'd you want to go there?
Well, I grew up there as a kid and I liked it. I liked Argentina. I wanted to go international. The El Paso Intelligence Center was good, but I wanted to get out and see a little bit more of the world and be able to use my Spanish and so forth. So I applied for that one. I got that, and that was a big change for me with DEA, because what it was, when I walked through the door, there was 4 agents, and every one of those agents treated me as an equal, every one of them, and they were great guys.
Well, wait a minute, but when you say there was a change, were you not getting treated well in El Paso?
Well, in El Paso, you had okay. So at the El Paso Intelligence Center, it's mostly agents that were in the later stages of their careers, right? And so you had people that were looking at you like maybe you're a dumb kid because you're younger than them, or you're not an agent or whatever. But it wasn't. They had the analysts mostly to one section and the agents to another section. So you didn't really interact as much as you would have in a normal field division, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like in the Denver field division, you don't have that daily interaction, right? So it was just a different dynamic. And so I got down there. I was actually shared a room with shared an office with one of the other agents there. And in Latin America, a lot of the agents, the work the agents do there, or in an international role is similar to what analysts do, in the sense that they may not be out on the street as much. Surveillance, you're not going to do a lot of surveillance in a foreign country unless you go with the local police to do it, right? You have to do everything at the invitation of the police. So the agents are left to try and figure out how to do more of a desktop type of an investigation than an actual physical investigation. So it was a really good working relationship I had with the agents there, and I learned a tremendous amount from each one of those agents that I had down there, and I think they learned some stuff from me as well, and had a blast. Had an absolute blast.
Did you actually get to go out at all?
Yeah, I did. I went out. Well, first of all, every walk-in informant that we had, I was the guy that interviewed them with one of the other agents, but I was involved in every one of those interviews. Every coordination effort that we had with the police, I was involved in those as well. So I was out, working cases with the police in the Argentine CIDE, which is their intelligence agency. So we were coordinating all the investigations with them. We were helping them. We provided training to the police. I provided intelligence training to the police. We provided equipment. There was no, there's a State Department, an entity, part of the State Department that would provide equipment to the local police officers. That they didn't have that there, so I was selected as that guy. So ordering Jeeps for the police and radios and computers and giving them to the police as well. Met with judges, with the other agents, politicians. I mean, it's a whole different thing, right? In the U.S., very seldom will an agent meet with a judge. In Argentina, we were meeting with 2 or 3 judges a week, and about different cases.
Give me an idea about that. You're meeting with judges about different cases. Why are you meeting with them? What are you talking to a judge about?
Okay, so the legal system in Argentina is different than the one in the United States. It's an you have investigative judges. So what happens, you have the prosecutor and you have the defendant and you have the judge. And the judge takes all the information from both. It's mostly, this was back then, that's changed a bit now. But,
Okay.
the prosecutor would present all of his case in writing. The defendant would provide all of their defense in writing. And the judge would have to then take it, and he could investigate any of what either side was saying and then make a decision. So the judge would often come in and say, hey, okay, what do you know about this situation? Or would ask us, and we'd show up and we'd say, okay, we know this, and this is how they operate. Or do you know if this person could be connected to a larger organization, and then ask us. We had a thing, we actually had a lunch, once a month luncheon this was started by one of the other agents in the office, which is fantastic. And once a month we'd meet with like 5 or 6 judges over lunch, and the head of police and the head of the Coast Guard's narcotics group and the head of the Gendarmeria, which is the border guards narcotics agents group. It would all sit around and have an asado, which is a cookout, and we just discuss things. And we had a rule that whatever was discussed amongst us had to remain amongst us. But it was just an absolutely fantastic way for everybody to know each other and get along and work better. So there's a lot of a political side that you have to do when you're overseas that you normally don't see in the United States, right? When you're doing cases, or not to that extent, at least.
When you're in Buenos Aires, you're assigned to the embassy, right?
Yeah.
What other agencies are there?
Well, okay, we had U.S. Customs was there at the time. Oh, no, wait a second. At the time I was there, no, DEA was there.
Mm-hmm.
You had FAA was there.
Really?
Yeah, they had one agent. Yep, they had to cover the U.S. airlines that are traveling throughout Latin America.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Okay.
You have CIA, you have all the State Department agencies there, right? It's mostly State Department. We didn't have FBI, we didn't have Customs because the embassy wasn't big enough. So the Customs agents and the FBI agents in they covered that region. Were actually in they were assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Uruguay, in Montevideo, Uruguay, which is kind of great. I mean, kind of interesting because what would happen was whatever they needed in Argentina, they call us. We'd do whatever they needed for them. Whatever we needed in Uruguay, we'd call them to do whatever we needed there. It was a really good relationship. I mean, I always say, you hear all these things about agency rivalries, and that's at the top, right? I mean, that's where it is. Agent to agent, everybody helped everybody. So,
But with that being said, let me ask you this, because I talked to another guy who was, stationed in South America. And maybe it's different from you as a different perspective as an intel analyst, because people are looking at you different than an agent. But did you notice the way that State Department viewed DEA?
oh yeah. State Department and DEA never got along. They didn't. They looked at DEA as cowboys with guns, and these guys are there to do all diplomacy, right? Everything get done through diplomacy. So, of course, the regional security officers in the State Department, special agents, no, but the ones that are the normal State Department, there was a lot of animosity there. And I remember, in different embassies that I've worked throughout my career where State Department would try and screw with DEA, and DEA would try and screw with the State Department just because, it could be done. But things as stupid as, you have to buy for your official vehicles, the government vehicles, you have to buy a U.S. manufactured vehicle because that's what the State Department rules say. Well, some of the stuff we were doing is in Argentina, there's not too many American cars, right? So what we're doing, if you show up in a Chevy Blazer or one of the, back then, right? Immediately they know who you are, right? So we bought local cars. If they had Renault, we bought Renault. If they had Fiat, we bought Fiat. I mean, just because we had to kind of blend in more. And that used to be a bone of contention with the State Department. Things like our houses were, DEA paid for our houses. So our houses were a little bit nicer than some of the State Department ones. So that was a rub as well. So, but in general terms, I mean, you got along the best you could, right?
Yeah. 97, you get to Miami.
Yeah.
Why Miami?
Okay. Let's see. In 1997, I was coming out of Argentina, and we could put in for where we wanted to go. And I was looking for something bigger. They had no head of intelligence there at the time. They had they had one group supervisor position that was opening up. And I wanted to be back in the fray here. And I said, I wanted something that's close to Latin America, that's connected with Latin America to use my knowledge of the region and my language ability. And I wanted a challenge. So I put in for the supervisor position at the Miami Field Division. And
Okay, so wait a minute then. Is this your first supervisor spot?
Yep, it'd be my first supervisor spot.
Okay, two questions. Could you have gotten to Miami as just a regular IA?
Yep.
Okay, so why did you decide to do the supervisor spot?
Because I wanted to grow in my career. I wanted to continue advancing, right?
Okay.
I thought that I enjoyed very much the work I was doing, but I thought that I could make a difference, with the whole Intel program itself, with the experience that I had, which was I kind of skirted the line between operational and Intel for a long time, right? So I thought that I could bring a lot to the table by doing that.
So what were you working on in Miami then?
Well, when I came into Miami, I was a group supervisor there, and so there was about 10 or 12 analysts. Some of them reported directly to me. Some of them reported to other group supervisors, but had a dotted line to me because they were assigned to the specific groups. So we were doing two things. We were doing operational intelligence, which was working with the agents to do the cases and help them gather intelligence for their investigations. But then we were also doing things like putting out reports on the marijuana situation in Miami, the cocaine situation in Miami, those type of, or in Florida, those type of things. Then we also put out a bulletin one of the things that we did, which was actually kind of interesting, we put out a weekly a report on the best cases, which created kind of a rivalry between all the different groups, which was great because I get group supervisors calling me up saying, "Hey, you didn't tell our case, you didn't put in our investigation that we did last week where we seized this amount, this amount." And I'd say, "Well, you never gave me that information." And then they'd send it to me. They'd start sending it to me, but it would land on the desk of the SAC, and they knew this, and so everybody wanted to look good in front of the SAC, right? And the SAC would then sometimes send those up to Washington as well. So,
and I gotta think that's really helpful for you,
yeah,
in intel, because now people are begging, sending you information.
Yeah. And so that was one of the things that I implemented there. That was it was kind of cool. And so,
yeah, that's a great idea.
And then we ended up growing the intel program there so much that they decided they want a 15 position in Miami. And of course, I pushed hard for that position, didn't get it. It was given to another 15 who had been in Washington for a number of years, but he'd been at 15 for a long time. So he was a good guy. So they ended up giving it to him. But when he came in after about 6 or 8 months of him coming in, I figured it was time that I move on. I thought I had done what I could do in the Miami Field Division. So
what was the big thing in Miami at the time? What were a lot of the cases revolving around? Was it still cocaine, or how did?
It was cocaine, some heroin, but it was mostly cocaine. Yeah.
Okay. So you get out of Miami and you end up going to La Paz, Bolivia. Why Bolivia? Why'd you want to go there?
Okay, I have an interesting connection with Bolivia. My wife's grandmother and mother are Bolivian. I met my wife in Argentina, married her, but her mother and grandmother are Bolivian. Her father was of German descent, and so I liked Bolivia. My father actually was the country attaché in Bolivia at one point, prior to his retiring. And so I had been there a couple of times in La Paz, and I liked it, and it was just a different place. And so I put in for that. Also, it had a lot of responsibility in the sense that I was the intelligence group supervisor for all of Bolivia. So I was essentially head of intelligence for all of Bolivia, but also there are other countries in the region that we covered. Brazil, they didn't have a group supervisor for intel in Brazil, so I kind of took over that responsibility whenever anything needed to be done. At the time, we had the same thing there are other countries, Paraguay and Bolivia. Paraguay and Uruguay and all. They didn't have an intel head, and so I essentially took over that role. So whenever there was an issue or anything, I was the guy that went down to interview them. I was the guy that made decisions.
Are you down there as a 14 though?
I'm down as a 14.
How many do you have? People underneath you?
Yes, I had at that time I had 5 people underneath me in La Paz, and then I had one in Santa Cruz and one in Cochabamba. Yeah.
Is there a difference between the work that you were doing in Bolivia as opposed to Buenos Aires?
Yeah, completely different work.
Okay, so what are you doing then? What's the difference?
Okay, well, the agency is doing completely different work because in Bolivia you're actively involved in the interdiction. So they were going out with the police, like we were doing Operation Snowcap had stopped by now, but every time there was a raid, we had investigators going out on the raid. We had special agents going out on the raids with the police. They're very much involved in interviewing and actively working with the police, like hand in hand. It wasn't as much of an advisory role. There was a lot more active activity. Active activity.
You're in Bolivia from 2001 to 2002, but this is the end of your DEA career. You essentially do 15 years. Why?
Well, let me tell you where that started. Okay.
Okay.
So when I arrived in La Paz, my oldest son was 3 months old, and pretty cool. His first airplane ride was in business class with a diplomatic passport. So not many people can say that, but that was him. But we get into La Paz, Bolivia, and for the first 2 months, all was going well. But my son had a little bit of a, we didn't realize this at the time. I get called back to headquarters to do an advanced supervisory training class. And my wife came with me with my son. And as we got on the plane, all of a sudden my son became very, very active. And we're like, wow, this is weird. And because he was normally a nice, calm baby. And in the 1 week we were in the United States, he gained more weight than the 2 months that he was in Miami. It was in La Paz. So we realized when we got back to the embassy, and when we got back to La Paz, we brought him into the embassy doctor. And my son was again very non-active. And they said, well, he's being affected by the lack of altitude. La Paz is 13,500 feet above sea level, right? So they said, you really should get your son back down to sea level. So what ended up happening was my wife moved to Santa Cruz, Bolivia, which is just a couple hundred feet above sea level, and where her grandmother lived, and she moved in with her grandmother and my son, while I remained in La Paz. And what I ended up doing was traveling back and forth, flying back and forth every weekend to see my wife and son. And so after about 4 or 5 months of this, I realized, geez, this is no life. I mean, really, I'm not, So I started looking to go back to headquarters. And I got a bunch of pushback because I was, they spent a lot of money to get me to Bolivia. I had pushed hard to get to that position. I had lobbied for that position because I wanted it. I had told them that I was going to be there for 3 years, which is what the normal is. So they didn't want to, they didn't want to move me back. And I had a bit of a contentious time in Bolivia as well too, because I came from an office where you had Miami, but when I was in Bolivia, in Argentina, being only 5 people, we'd close the door and we'd have it out with the country attaché or with whoever's in charge, whatever, or between us, right? And it eventually would just say, whatever you decide to the boss, we're going to do, but I'm telling you, this is the way it is, right? And so when I get to La Paz, it's not that same dynamic, right? So I'd go in and talk to one of the ASACs and say, hey, this is wrong because this and this, and I'd be told, hey, nobody asked your opinion, right? And so and I didn't shut up. I figured I was being paid to talk, and so and to give my opinion, and so it became kind of contentious there as well. So it wasn't a good time, I'm away from my family, kind of a lot of contention there. So. And headquarters I'm getting pushback from headquarters, but ultimately headquarters says, okay, what we'll do is we'll put you in a 15 position in headquarters. So don't know what position yet, but we're going to put you there. And so I fly up to headquarters to meet with them about this and bring my wife. And it happens to be dead of winter. And she hates it. She absolutely hates it. So she says to me, you want to go here? Fine, but I'm going to be living in Miami. And I said, okay. And right about that time, I get a call from Microsoft. And Microsoft says, hey, look, we're looking for head of investigations for Latin America. Are you interested? Now, there are a couple former people from DEA that were working at Microsoft at the time. But when I spoke with them later, they said that they had not given my name to anybody in Microsoft. So I'm to this day don't know how Microsoft found out about me.
Really?
Right? Yeah. But they reached out and they asked me to interview, and I fly up to interview, and the interview went really well. And they basically said, okay, we want you in Brazil. And I said, okay, no problem. I said, I'd rather be in Miami. The Latin American headquarters of yours is in Miami. I said, what if we start in Miami? They said, okay, we'll tell you what, we'll start you in Miami. But we'll, in a year's time, we want to look and revisit this to see if maybe move you back to Brazil. I said, fine. So at that point, I ended up resigning from DEA to take a position as head of investigations for Latin America for Microsoft.
Looking back on that, with 15 years of DEA, mistake? I mean, is it a mistake because what is it? Would it have been 20 for a full retirement?
No, it'd be 25 because
25. Okay, so you had to do 10 more.
Yeah, it would have been 25 because of the age limit there.
Okay.
But today I kind of kick myself for not doing it in the sense that I don't have a pension, right? I lost that. But
Yeah.
I look at everything like my time in DEA was absolutely wonderful. I had the time of my life. I learned a lot. I had a blast. I grew as a person. And then I moved to Microsoft. In my time in Microsoft, I had a blast. I grew as a person, and I enjoyed every bit of it.
What kind of work were you doing at Microsoft?
Okay, so I was doing intellectual property investigations, so it was anti-counterfeiting work. And so,
Okay, so let me ask you this before we get into that. Did you have any intellectual property experience with being an IA prior to taking that job as Microsoft?
no, nothing.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing whatsoever. But I learned very quickly that intellectual property investigations are identical to drug investigations.
Yep.
Because what you do is you look for the smallest person, you buy from them, try and go up, find out who their supplier is, and try and find out who their manufacturer and importer is, and then take them down at the source. So I learned that very, very quickly. What I had no clue about was the business world. Okay, DEA, we had right or wrong. So if it took you 5 years to put somebody in jail because he's a drug trafficker, it took you 5 years, and the resources, not unlimited, but you had enough resources to take care of things. In the corporate world, it doesn't work that way. If you can't take them down in 2 to 3 weeks, they move on to something else, something more interesting. So, and I learned this the hard way. So, and I can't get into a specific product because,
Sure.
but so there's a product. I go into Microsoft. I say, hey, look, I found they're making this, they're counterfeiting this exact product, and they're doing about 10,000 of these a week. And they said, Chris, not interested. I go, okay. Go back to my desk and start working with some things, and I go back the next week. I say, hey, it's actually much bigger. They're doing like 20,000 a week. I said, Chris, we're not interested. I said, Jesus. So I tried a third time when I found out they were doing 100,000 of these. I found this huge organization. I went back and I said, doing 100,000 of these things. He said, Chris, how many times do I have to tell you? Not interested. I said, you know what? Okay. I went back to my desk. I wrote out my resignation, walked back in and handed the resignation to him. So what the hell is this? I said, well, you hired me to do a job, and you're not allowing me to do the job, and I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing. And they said, whoa, Chris, sit down. I said, what we need you to understand is we don't sell the product you're looking at in Brazil. It's not being sold in Brazil, so it's not taking away from market share, right? So we will be launching it in 2 years. And when we launch that product in 2 years, we're going to want you to go and clean it up. But now it's a waste of time and money. And right then it clicked. It says, it's all about the money.
Yeah.
And that was an invaluable lesson I learned for corporations. Yeah, right and wrong, they do believe in right and wrong. Absolutely. Every private company has its own internal ethics, and they will be guided by those ethics. But in general terms, if we go after a counterfeiter and we can't get them within 3 weeks, 4 weeks time, we move on to the next one that we can get, because that's all the time and energy they want to expend towards a particular counterfeiter. So, invaluable experience. But so what we're doing is doing intellectual property investigation where we go after people who are counterfeiting Microsoft products. And we had some really interesting raids, some of the biggest raids that they had up until that point. And I had a blast doing that too, because we got to use a lot of creativity in doing some of the raids.
What was your position?
I head of anti-counterfeiting investigations for Microsoft for Latin America, for Microsoft Latin America. But for example, we had one big case in Paraguay. It was one of the cases that I had done, and there's shopping centers, an 8-story shopping center. You go in and 2 different stalls or 5 different stalls selling counterfeit Microsoft products. We'll go in, take them down, and come back in the afternoon. There'd be different name, and they're selling the products again. And I'm like, we got to do this different, right? So I flew down and met with the Minister of Interior for Paraguay, and he and I had a big debate back and forth for about 3 hours, and saying, well, why should the government of Paraguay help the private corporation. You should be helping our people. And we had debating back and forth. But ultimately, I found out that this guy wanted to be president at one time. So I said to him, look, if you help me out on this investigation, I said, I'll make sure that when we get the raid completed, that we'll have somebody from CNN there, so you can stand up and say, hey, this is the first in a number of things. And he said, oh, okay, perfect. So what we ended up doing was we gathered in his office, we gathered the chief of police, we gathered chief of the tax department, immigration, and even got a hold of the county the guys that take care of the building inspections to make sure that they're safe, right? So we got all these people together and we coordinated this big investigation, but they weren't told what it was about. They had no idea what the target was. They're told, come to me for the target. And so what we ended up doing was this was in Ciudad del Este, Paraguay, which is 4.5 hours ride from Asuncion, the capital of Asuncion, where we were. So I rented 2 buses. And next thing you know, we loaded police up and all these people on these buses. The judge is there. The judge was the only guy that knew what was going on besides myself. And we ended up grabbing all of their cell phones, putting all the police officers' cell phones all in bags. And as we rode down, we gave briefings, and halfway through we switched, and the judge gave the other briefing and I gave briefings. And we showed up at the shopping center and 2 huge tourist buses, and they're thinking, oh, these people are coming in to buy. Next thing you know, we conduct the raid. The 8 stores, we ended up doing 8 stores. We ended up closing down the shopping center for 4 days because they had to do reforms for, there was illegal kitchens, the access ways were blocked and things. And this happened right before Christmas. And we did it in a time. So it was really interesting because we used a whole bunch of different laws that had nothing to do with intellectual property, but it served our purpose in trying to at least block their commerce for 4 days. We did the same thing in Mexico at another time, and they ended up, a huge crowd convened, and they ended up taking back they ended up holding the police hostage for a little bit, but they ended up taking back all of the counterfeit products. But we ended up shutting down that shopping center for 30 days in mid-November to mid-December, while they did the reform. So anyway, so I had a blast doing that job as well.
It's interesting you're talking about that interaction that you had where it's like the Brazil thing, and they don't really aren't. It's not that they're not listening to you, but they don't want to act on it, and then it kind of clicks. I've had some interactions with some corporations where it's like, hey, you guys could get a lot farther if you did X, and they just don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you have to switch that mindset from government agency or government agent, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, to something else because, they have their own.
Yeah, in government, corporations, each corporation has its own different way of thinking.
Yeah.
And there's some corporations I work with that have former law enforcement people as head of their investigations unit. And they're great because, we speak the same language.
Right.
They know, and others you have to kind of try and educate. And there's some that say, look, I don't care what it says. I've got a client that says, I don't care what the law states, we won't allow you to do a trash run.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, we feel that's an invasion of somebody's privacy. We will not allow you to do it. So you have to abide by what they say, right? But
yeah. Okay, well, you're at Microsoft. You're only there for 2 years. Why are you only there for 2 years?
Okay. I realized that all the people that I was hiring to do the work for Microsoft, that I could do a better job than they could. I had spent, at this point in my DEA career, I had spent over 10 years in Latin America. I've been in probably every country in Latin America at least once. And I realized that the people I was hiring to do the job weren't doing a professional job, in my opinion. So at the time, I had grown the position in Microsoft so much as well that we needed two people to do the job, or they wanted to split it to two people to do the job, but they didn't have the headcount to do it. So I saw that as a perfect opportunity. Actually, I want to say I saw it. My wife saw it as a perfect opportunity. She was the one that recommended that I do this. But I actually came in and I told him, look, why don't we do this? I said, I'll quit. I'll resign from my position, and you can hire somebody in my replacement. They'll take half of the region. I'll take the other half of the region to do it for you as an outsource. They're like, well, you'd really quit and get rid of your benefits and all? I said, yeah. And they're like, well, that's the best of both worlds for us. So that's what I ended up doing. And they guaranteed me 20 hours per week for the first 6 months on the job that I had my own company. So that's how I started the company. And my company was started I had a small apartment in Argentina that I moved to. It was a little vacation apartment. It was like 600 square feet, right? Really tiny thing. And we had a balcony that was 1 meter wide by 2 meters long. So it was like, 6 foot by 3 foot, right? I enclosed the balcony, bought a laptop, and I sat on that balcony, and my wife sat with her back to me. And that's how we started the company.
Wow.
And the first 2 months, it was like, what did I do? Because I had one client. I had no idea about how to get additional clients, right? And all of a sudden, a client that I had helped, one of the other investigative agencies that we had hired on, another section of Microsoft had hired on, and that other section had some issues with the work they did, and I was sent to go figure out what was right. And the other agency actually did a pretty good job. They were correct. So I defended them on that issue. They found out that I was in Argentina now, and so they gave me one job, and the next thing you know, they gave me 5 jobs, and the next thing you know, it started snowballing from there.
Yeah, I found that if you're competent and you're good at your job, your reputation gets out there, and all of a sudden people are reaching out to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then my company went from the balcony to the second year, I rented another apartment in the same building. It was there for about 4 or 5 years. Then I moved out to a big office building. Then I opened an office in Miami, and essentially it's a small office here in Miami, and it was more of a marketing office than anything. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, or 10 years ago, I shifted my main office from Argentina to Paraguay because of the labor laws and issues that are really archaic in Argentina. And now I have my main office is at the World Trade Center in Paraguay, where I've got 7 people working there right now that are 24 hours, not 24 hours, 12 hours a day, not 24 hours a day. But we've got them working based out of Asunción, Paraguay right now.
So Chris, your company's called Mick Worldwide, and I'm assuming you're specializing, you only deal, or maybe you don't deal, but you're dealing with intellectual property, right?
Well, we deal with all types of corporate investigations and security. So
Okay.
We're full service. We do everything from fraud investigations to internal investigations, identifying assets. We do due diligence investigations. We do intellectual property investigations. We do a lot of insurance investigations. We also do security for VIPs that are traveling throughout the region. So we got people who are in the entertainment world or who are executives who travel. We'll put bodyguards, armored vehicles, and security agents to cover them while they're traveling.
So you really kind of expanded to everything.
Yeah, and we cover the entire region. Right now, I've been. There's not a country I haven't been in the region at least a dozen times, and we have people in every country in the region. And while we seem to be a small company where we only have 7 full-time employees in Paraguay, 1 here and 1 in Argentina, there are about 90 subcontractors that we use every month. That we give them about 80 to 90% of their work. So
I would consider you an overachiever based on everything we talked about. But one of the things I just briefly want to talk to you about is you wrote one book, and we're going to talk about this other book. But the book that you wrote was Counterfeits, War Stories, and Lessons Learned, An Investigator's Perspective. Tell me about what that book's all about.
Okay, well, I had an idea to. I like teaching. I've always liked teaching. I've always liked training, and so my wife actually told me, she says, "Well, why don't you write a book on how to conduct intellectual property investigations?" And I said, "Okay." So I sat down. I started writing a book, and I got about 2 chapters into the book, and I handed over. I said to my wife, I said, "Take a look at it. What do you think?" And she read it. She said, "It's crap." This is my wife, right?
Yeah,
The
well,
person that loves me.
She's honest.
Yeah. She says, well, you've written, it's intellectual, well, it's like something from a college that you've written. Would you read it? And I sat down and I looked at it again and I go, no, I'd be bored to death reading this. And she says, you love to tell stories. She says, why don't you teach through your stories? And I said, huh. So what I did is I said, put together is how to conduct intellectual property investigations through real cases that we've done and mistakes I've made along the way and what we've learned from them. So in the book, it has, I think it's 30 different stories of different issues and investigations or different ways investigations went and what we learned from those. And it takes you through from step one to the end on how to conduct intellectual property investigations. So that's
Okay,
how that book came about.
So for the audience, there's going to be obviously a link, and you'll probably see a picture of this book as we're talking here. What about your new book? As if you're not doing enough.
So my new book is it should be coming out within the next week or so. It's a novel. It's the first attempt. I've probably written hundreds of thousands of pages over my career of reports and technical writing. This was the first time that I actually got to be creative in writing. And so this is 100% fictional novel, but the characters in the novel, a lot of them are real. So this happens to do, the novel is about a DEA agent and who gets assaulted while conducting a raid or after conducting a failed raid, let's put it that way. And his seeking revenge on these people. But the drug trafficker is an actual drug trafficker. His backstory is an actual backstory of people that I've dealt with in my past. And the different characters in the book, they're actual people that I've dealt with in the past. And so they have interesting backstories that are built into it. And so that's what the book is.
Can you say the title of the book?
It's called The Hunter.
Okay, so The Hunter, and it's December 3rd, so it should come out around December 10th?
Around December 10th, yeah.
So December 10th, 2024, audience.
Yeah.
Tell me, Chris, did you find it difficult writing a fictional book?
I did. As a matter of fact, it took me like 6 months to even get started. Right? I had the first opening, the scene. I had the scene in my head. So one day I just said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to, but I had no idea where it was going to go or how it was going to end or even where the whole thing was going to take place. And so I said one day, well, I'm just going to sit down and write out the opening scene that I have. And I wrote out the opening scene. And next thing you know, the opening scene was like 10 pages. I'm like, well, wait a minute. That's more than what I thought that I had in this opening scene. So I said, well, I'm just going to sit down and try and write. And then if I have to change things around later on, I'll change things around. And so I just came in early every morning and like for an hour and said, I'm just going to write. And I started writing and the story developed itself. I mean, it just kind of came out little by little. I eventually changed, I have some inspirational moment at 9 o'clock at night and sit down and write at that time. But it just kind of fell into place and the story kind of wrote itself. And so it was fun. It was I find writing cathartic. I mean, I have my own blog that I do on my own my website as well.
What's your website?
It's ChristopherMacolini.com.
Okay.
And I have a blog that I write about different things that I do in my life, that I had in my life. And the idea is that everybody has a story, so this is a little of mine. And I invite people, I said, please send me some information on you. And sometimes I get some good stories back, and most of the times nobody writes back. I bump into people that say, well, your life was more interesting than mine. But I'm like, well, not to me, it's not. I mean, I'd like to hear about other people's lives.
Yeah.
Mine is boring to me because I lived it. It's not, this was my life. But I like hearing about other people's, even if people that feel that their life has been boring. I mean, someone who's spent their life as an architect building buildings or something. To me, that's fascinating, right? I mean, you're building something, you're leaving something behind for future generations. So everybody has a story. It's I like hearing about them.
So again, getting back to as if you don't do enough, on your LinkedIn page, you also have your business, a business coach, kind of a life coach. Can you explain what that is? What do you do?
Yeah, well, that's mostly, I try and help people who are transitioning out of a government job, whether it be law enforcement or sometimes even military. They'll reach out and say, hey, look, I'm looking for a job, coming out to try and transition to the corporate world. And what I try and do is not help them find a job. What I try and do is help them prepare their skills and understand how they can transition over, because a lot of times their expectations are much different than what the job market is, or the expectations of the actual job are completely different to what is reality in a corporation. So the idea is to try and set them up to be the best possible candidate. And then, of course, over the years, I've met a lot of people, and I get a lot of people that call me and say, hey, look, I got this job opening. Do you know of anybody? So I am able to help a lot of people find jobs as well. But it's mostly helping them transition from the government world to the corporate world. So
When did you meet your wife?
1992. That was 1 year into being in Argentina.
Okay, so in Argentina. So the question I always ask the law enforcement guys, and maybe it's a little bit different for you, but maybe it's not, because I get the impression that you were working a lot anyway. Did working DEA as an intel analyst, did that affect your family at all?
Yeah, it did. I mean, well, it did positive, in the positive really outweighs the negative.
Okay.
So we had situations where we had a couple of negative situations where my house, for example, in Bolivia was right across the street from the Colombian embassy. And so we used to have people that used to sit on the house and watch the house. And even when we were in Argentina, we were followed. And, and I had, as someone in DEA, my wife would always say, oh, I met this person today, this woman. I said, what does her husband do? He didn't give her a phone number, right? They don't know where we live, right? And, for my kids, when they go over I want to spend the night at such and such house. Well, let me figure out who they are first, and I'd look into the person, So I had that aspect, and maybe that may have affected them a little bit negatively, because my kids are maybe cautious now. I mean, a little bit more cautious than what they might have been otherwise, but they're smart kids, and I think the positive part of it is a really positive part. I've got boys in college right now, both of them, and they're really good kids that never mess with drugs. They seldom drink any alcohol. They're just good and focused on what they did. They're into sports. They were into doing things the right way. And I think that has to do a little bit with the fact that that's how I live my life, and that's how my wife lives her life. We always try and do things the right way, right? And I think that's part of DEA. Neither wants anything to do with law enforcement, right? Which is, from a father's standpoint, good, right? But I'm real happy with their life choices, what they're doing now. So.
Did being with DEA up until even what you're doing now, I mean, you're dealing with drug dealers, you're dealing with bad people, you're dealing with counterfeiters, obviously doing illegal stuff. Did that affect the way that you see people? Like if you can look back into life from when you started with DEA to now, perspective change?
Yeah. When I did. I had when I was in DEA, I had a much more negative view on certain aspects of people. Like, if he has money, he's got to be a crook. Well, that's not true. I mean, I know now that I'm in the corporate world, is if you work hard, you make money, right? I mean, you can make money being a good person. So, but back then it was like, he has to be doing some he's screwing somebody, right? You know, but that was, maybe that was me and not law enforcement, right? But I always tend to look at the negative side first when I was in law enforcement as well. So it's like, why shouldn't I do this, right? Or why shouldn't I meet with that person? What does that person have that he's hiding, right? Instead of, now I've kind of shifted and saying, well, why should, why should I do something as opposed to why shouldn't I do something? So the perspective has changed. But again, I'm not sure if it was so much law enforcement or me, right? You know, I think you grow as a person as you move throughout your career. I still, I'm still cautious on some people, but I think I have reason to be cautious on some people. But for the most part, I think most people are good.
Yeah.
So.
Chris, really fascinating career that you had with DEA. If you were going to give any advice to somebody that specifically wanted to do an intel analyst job, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them jump in with both feet. I mean, the only way you're going to do anything and do it right and get the most out of it is to jump in with both feet and do it. Learn as much as you can. DEA was a wonderful, at least when I was in, was a wonderful organization. I haven't had much contact with the agency in the past 15, 20 years. But I loved every minute of my time with DEA, and I wouldn't change it for the world. We had, like anything, you have good times, you have bad times, but the bad times you learn from. And the bad times are I've had agents and people in DEA that I used to get in knockdown, drag out fights with, and consider them some of them good friends, and others, I learned a hell of a lot from them from doing that. And may not like them as a person, but I respect the hell out of them because I learned a lot from them. So I think it's a unique place to learn a lot of skills that are very valuable in life. On top of the fact that I still believe that, we're doing good for the world. I mean, if we can stop the drug trafficking or the people from taking drugs, I think it's a good thing. So you have that part of it. You have the altruistic part where you feel that you're doing good. But I think it was just a wonderful experience all around. And I've met so many good and interesting people, and was proud and still am proud to call them brothers, right?
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, I couldn't have done an effective job without a good intel analyst. And whether it's at DEA, FBI, Customs, local agencies have this, I just think that position is invaluable. And I think it's a really interesting thing to do. Look, if you don't want to, now you were in a different situation because you started off and you wanted to carry a gun. But for those watching who don't want to carry a gun, it's a great gig.
It absolutely is, and it's a great way to be able to be involved as well. And I guarantee it will be the ride of your life. It really will. I mean, I seldom run into an agent or an analyst or someone who says, "God, that sucked." Every one of them is like, they're almost afraid to leave the agency because what else is going to compare? I mean, it's tough to compare to. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I had a blast. I really did. And I grew up in the agency, right? I mean, I grew up with, my dad was an agent when I was growing up as a kid. So I saw it from that perspective. And I saw it living in the agency, and it was a blast. I would say anybody that's interested in doing it, go for it, but make your own path in there. I mean, look for what they tell you to do, but see how else you can help. I mean, there's so many ways you can help that aren't structured. And if you give it your all, you get a lot out of it. You get a lot back.
Chris, thanks for the interview. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a blast.